So welcome everyone to the Queensland Stakeholder Forum for the Energy Charter Independent Accountability Panel. Now I'll unmute myself and start again, sorry. Welcome everyone to the Queensland Stakeholder Forum for the Energy Charter Independent Accountability Panel. In starting the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'd like to introduce the panel. I'm Claire Petrie, the chair. I was the Energy and Water Ombudsman in New South Wales, and I'm now the chair of the New Energy Tech Consumer Code Council. Cassandra Goldie will give us a wave. She's the CEO of ACOS, and Andrew Richards is the CEO of the Energy Users Association of Australia. The panel has received disclosures from 16 signatories to the Energy Charter, and if you haven't seen them, they're all available on the IAP website. The purpose of this forum is obviously to hear from you as consumers and consumer representatives, to hear to what extent the disclosures from the signatories represent your experience during 2021. If we have people from the energy companies at this forum, and I think we do, they won't be speaking. They just want to hear directly from their stakeholders, and I've asked them to be off mute and off camera. In fact, this year the CEOs asked if the stakeholder forums could be held first, so that they could respond to what you have to say in these meetings with the panel. They're quite keen to hear what you have to say. This is the third year of the Independent Accountability Panel's work in reviewing the disclosures of the companies that signed up to the Energy Charter. Even though it's still a work in progress and things develop each year, we hope that you share our view that the process has developed positively, with shorter, more focused disclosures from signatories and a shorter, more focused report from the panel. As last year, we asked the signatories to provide a realistic and transparent response in their disclosures. We don't want to see a public relations document or hear about actions that signatories have to undertake in any case by law or regulation. In particular, we asked them to tell us what it really means to put customers first in terms of the culture of their company, the involvement of their board and or senior management in the charter process, and their response to the recommendations in the panel's 2020 report. As we noted in our report last year, it's disappointing that AGL and Origin Energy have withdrawn as charter signatories, and we commend Energy Australia as one of the big three for their continuing commitment as a charter signatory. There are some large government-owned energy companies that have never been involved with the charter, a situation of poor sector leadership that we again note with regret. It's sad that in 2021 we're still having to talk about the impact of COVID-19, with everyone in Australia having been impacted in some way. Individuals, families and businesses, some more than others. Again, sadly, there have been natural disasters in some areas with serious impacts, including on the delivery of energy services. We know, a community advocate once reminded me that energy supply is a secondary problem if you can't afford a roof over your head. And we're aware that housing stress for many people around the country has always been an issue, but it's a particularly significant issue now for many people around the country. The themes for this year's report are in fact likely to be similar to those of last year. Affordability of essential energy services, transmission to net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner, and with the consequent key issues that no customers should be left behind in that transition. So that's by way of introduction. I'll ask Cassandra Goldie to talk briefly about the affordability issue and Andrew Richards to talk about sustainability and transition, and then we'll hand it over to you. So Cass?
Thanks, Claire, and just want to acknowledge on Gadigal country and pay respects to elders past and present, and to acknowledge all of you who are joining us here this afternoon. This has been pretty full on year, and we're very aware that as energy advocates, you have worked extremely hard this year to try and make it as easy as possible for constituencies. And so we are very grateful that you've put aside this time this afternoon to share with us your views. You may remember at this time last year, as the panel, we came through, to the signatories and others saying what we foresaw was effectively a debt tsunami, that we would see really large accumulation of energy debt, and that we wanted to encourage the signatories to do everything that they could to be able to try and prevent that, and also obviously to protect people. What we understand as at this point is that we do have a serious increase in the levels of energy debt, but we also have heard so far that there have been some really important improvements made to the way that energy retailers in particular have sought to protect people from being disconnected. And so we'd really, with the context that Claire's painted here, we know that housing affordability has been a massive, also big part of that kind of, systemic kind of direction that's putting pressure on people's expenditure, and of course a very uncertain trajectory around income levels. We predict that we've got a pretty rocky road ahead over the next 12 months. So we're particularly keen to hear from you about what you see that's worked really well, what you see as being some of the most serious issues now, and so that we as a panel can help to provide our recommendations of the work that's been done over the last 12 months, what has worked that we want to build on, to really try and ensure that we get on top of what is obviously a very serious issue for many people with the level of indebtedness, and the fact that for some people there's a significant great uncertainty about what lies ahead. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Cass. Andrew?
Thanks, Claire. Just like to recognise that I'm on Wurundjeri land here in Victoria. Thank you all for your attendance today. As Cass said, it's a helter-skelter environment for energy consumers and consumer advocates, so thank you for being here. The transition to net zero by 2050 or sooner is a highly desirable thing, and I think we all are striving to get there in our own way. One of the things that we're concerned about, though, is how we get there is being just as important as the target, because how you get there is where all the costs lie. And just as we're trying to transition from a COVID environment into what we consider to be a new normal and making sure that we're bringing everyone along on that, we want to make sure that we can transition to net zero by 2050 and use it to lift people up out of hardship rather than entrench hardship. And one of the concerns we have that we may actually entrench hardship and vulnerability if we don't get the energy transition right. So that gives us a theme of no customer being left behind. So no customer left behind coming out of COVID, and no customer left behind transitioning to net zero by 2050. I know lots of people who are very excited about the technology involved in net zero by 2050, and they're going to be highly engaged in that. And that's fantastic. But we also know that there are a lot of other people who just can't afford the technology on the road to net zero, and probably never will. And we want to make sure that somehow we can bring those people along with us as well. So the other part of the transition, of course, is energy is now going to be in people's backyards and in the paddock next door, and the power lines running down the road to get to that target. And that's bringing a whole lot of new issues in regional communities that need to be dealt with around social license and environmental compliance and a whole range of other things. So there's a lot of work that we need to do, and a lot of vulnerability that we need to avoid if we are to get to net zero by 2050 in the most just way. So we're looking forward to hearing from you all today. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Don't forget the good. Just don't talk about the bad and the ugly. If there's been some good things that are happening that we can incorporate in the report and share with others, so that others can do the good, then we want to hear about that as well. So back to you, Claire.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think that's an important point. We do want to hear about good examples that we can feed back to the signatories. So anything that you have to say. One of the issues that came up from the Victorian forum before was that whole question of digital disadvantage, not only on the basis of affordability, but often people who can afford it but live in remote areas often just have such problems with connection that it can be a real disadvantage to being able to participate digitally. And I would think that that's probably an issue in Queensland, given your size. So anyway, that's enough from us. It's over to you now to tell us about your experiences during 2021 and the feedback you would like to give to the panel for our report and to pass on to the CEOs of the signatory organisations. It's imperative that we have stakeholder feedback for our critique of the 2021 disclosures. So given your numbers, would you either use the put up your hand function on the on Zoom or the chat room, and you're free to put comments into the chat room in any case, or just shout out at me. So I'll keep an eye on who would like to speak. We have time, so that don't feel constrained by that. So it is over to you, and I'd invite comments and feedback. So who'd like to start? I see a hand going up. Wendy, yes, Wendy Miller from QCOS.
Hi, thank you very much. And I'll just do a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's perfect, Wendy.
Awesome, that's good news. Yeah, it's just some initial thoughts. So thanks for the overview of those two key themes, which I think seem aligned to my thinking. Just to make some comments around the affordability piece first, in terms of some things that I think have worked or were positive, was around, and it was driven by the AER in this example, but the moratorium on disconnections. I think what was interesting there is the lessons that were able to be learnt, I think, by some organisations when they were faced with needing to try and engage with customers or understand how they should approach things when they didn't have access to disconnection as a tool. And I have in my mind a reference to Ergon Retail, in particular, having spoken to them and being given pretty good examples of a whole variety of different engagement techniques that they were experimenting with and trialing to try and improve getting customers who I think ordinarily would have been called on from a disconnection perspective to actually reach out and seek help. Linked to that, I think also through the charter, work around disconnections in terms of the knock before you disconnect and the progress that has been made in understanding that there is actually a business case, let alone all of the other compelling reasons related to people's welfare, in changing the way that disconnections happen, and with knocking before you disconnect being the model that's been, I think, gaining traction. So I think that's a really fantastic example, and I would like to see that more widely adopted, including in Queensland. As I understand, it's not presently being adopted in Queensland. I'm happy to be told otherwise. Another really positive thing was with the charter again, was the Better Together initiative around the COVID vulnerability consumer research piece. And I think that, I suppose the reflection there was that last year what was great was that the industry started to come together and to talk under the umbrella of COVID and the uncertainty and the crisis element of that. It brought organisations to the table together in a more open way, seeking to solve some of these challenges and stay across some of these challenges. And that was really positive. And that kind of loops into what I would make a comment around about the transition and what we need to continue doing going forward from a transition perspective. But just to stay on this affordability piece and the COVID piece, that collaboration was really positive, and I think the initiative to put some dollars into funding a year's worth of 4 rounds of consumer research to understand the impacts of COVID, which has now led to additional funding to support vulnerable consumers, is a definite positive as well. So there's some reflections around affordability and some of the things that I've seen that were good stories. And then just a general comment to say that I think there's a strategic reorganizing of kind of industry strategic priorities and even some political priorities, where I think there's some heat coming off the affordability issue. And I guess I'd say to that I still think affordability is an extremely crucial issue, but I do think that this rise in importance around focusing in on an equitable and inclusive transition is gathering pace very quickly, and the scale of the challenge is huge. So on that one, I don't have so much to say around the transition in terms of what I've seen that's been great. I just think that I agree that it's a crucial priority and would almost be the key priority. And I think the Charter is extremely well placed to play a role there, given the level of collaboration that's required to try and tackle and solve dimensions of the transition challenge, especially for areas where there isn't a natural profitability incentive, which tends to be where the inclusion of people who may be left behind comes into the story. So I think on that, I don't have examples of things I've seen that have been amazing. I think this is a forward work agenda, really high priority. So I will stop speaking now, let others speak, and hopefully that's useful.
Thanks very much, Wendy. Yes. Sorry, I can't see your name. And M Fully Love, whatever that, and you're on mute.
Michael.
Michael, thank you very much.
Yes, just on that disconnection issue, I had to work on my holidays last year when Energex wrongfully disconnected a council office. So, and the council rang me to solve the problem. So, yes, there needs to be some work done so that there is not a repeat of that particular issue, because I can assure you working on my holidays to solve an Energex issue is not a good look.
Michael, sorry, where are you? Are you in an individual capacity or are you representing someone?
I represent the Local Government Association of Queensland. So I buy power for lots of the Queensland councils, and I field inquiries from them about the electricity industry, because they tend not to understand what the electricity industry is talking about. So I think from that perspective, you really need to make the communications far more down to earth, and so the average person can understand them. Yes, I can understand exactly what you're talking about, but the average person in the street, I would say, generally doesn't. So, and as evidence of that, I keep on getting calls from various people in various councils asking what are these people driving at with this? What do they mean with this? With whatever communication it was. So tends to be in electricity industry speak, which is not the speak that the normal person uses.
A point's been made in other forums, particularly, and if it affects local government, then people were talking about people of non-English speaking background or people with literacy problems, where the issue is even more compounded. So thank you for making that point.
Yeah.
Luke Reid.
Yeah, cool, thanks. So I'm from Energetic Communities, based in Brisbane. So I'm still going through them all, obviously, but I would like to support QCOS's position around fast and fair transition. So you probably know with Cass on the panel as well, that ACOS have just led a piece of work around a community declaration on climate change, community sector. And I think there's a lot in there around what the energy utilities can do. So I would like to see more around actual targets supporting the stronger of the Paris Agreement, so 1.5. And so not relying on far distant 2050 as a target year. So I'd like to see the generators in particular acknowledging that we need to act a bit faster. One of the good things in there was around the energy efficiency or energy management of First Nations communities. So in the Queensland context, we have some terrible housing situations in Woorabinda, Cherbourg, etc. So in the Queensland context, that'd be really good to see. So I think that was TransLink from memory that we're working on that one. Some of the other issues is around, just to reiterate your point earlier around going beyond the basic regulation. So I'd like to see more about what are they doing that's a little bit more innovative. Using the maturity metrics, some of those, I think the baseline of what they're saying is empowering is actually just business as usual. So that is a bit of a criticism about the Energy Charter itself rather than necessarily the retailers or the signatories. And bringing out a little bit more stronger what some of those innovative things are in their communications. The Better Together initiatives, the ones that I've had a look at, they're mostly around what the signatories are doing. There's not much in there about the communities, consumers being involved in those initiatives. Another one is around the best practice principles. So the Energy Consumers Australia Roundtable came up with some best practice principles. And they're not really being used around payment difficulty, etc. Another thing I'd like to see more of is getting off gas. I know this is a difficult one with some gas companies as signatories, but we really need to get off gas. We need to support electrification, and that of course carries risk around affordability of, say, electric vehicles and batteries and demand management opportunities. But I'd like to see more support for that. And just again on the framing of the just transition around the scientific consensus around the targets. I think that might be, oh yeah, and then I think one of the good examples was around the explicit informed consent around getting customers onto better offers. So ActuAGL was the case forward in that one. And then finally the CEO panels. I'm just wondering if CEOs from some of the community sector organisations and advocacy groups had been invited to those. I know that obviously with Cassandra on the IAP, but of those meetings that they hold regularly, are consumer orgs represented? Yeah, so that's pretty much things I've come up with so far.
Thank you very much, Luke, and there'll be time for you to come back into the discussion as well. Rose McGrath, where are you? There you are.
All right, thank you, Claire, and hello, everybody. My name is Rose McGrath and I work now at YFS. We are a community organisation in Logan. We're probably the largest community organisation. My position there is the home energy worker. It's actually funded by AGL. It's an outreach position. And also I am almost a financial counsellor. So I mainly work with frontline with clients, and I I do very little systemic advocacy. So today is actually a really good opportunity for me to raise some of the issues that I'm seeing. So I'm going to have some very specific issues and then a kind of wider issue as well. So one thing I see a lot of is systems issues where the energy retailers, and it is all retailers I work with, the systems are still not working as efficiently as they could be in respect of ensuring that people get concessions. So in Queensland, we have the Home Energy Emergency Assistance Scheme grant, which is an excellent grant. It stops people's debt from really increasing. It's $720 a year. We also have the Queensland Government Electricity Rebate, which is $340. Now, the problem with it's great that we have that. That's about $1,000, say, in 1 year, although you can only get the HEAS once every 2 years. This actually, if a customer can get access to these concessions, it actually does stop their debts from really escalating. The problem is a lot of the retailers' systems are not working that well, and it's very difficult. They're very chunky. Every time a tenant moves, the concession falls off, and it may not be, even in the same retailer. So there still needs, I would still like to see a lot of work done on systems issues around concessions. And there was a good story, and I know you're looking for good stories. Recently, AGL, which unfortunately is not a signatory to the charter, after 3 years, finally got their algorithm in their big robot they have to issue the HEAS applications. They finally changed the algorithm so they could issue HEAS application forms to closed accounts.
Sorry, Lolita.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Anyway, now a lot of my clients are domestic and family violence, and a lot have closed accounts. And I, for many months, could not get, and for some retailers, I can still not get the HEAS application for them because their account is closed, even though technically the government policy is they're allowed. So that's one example. But it was good that AGL changed their algorithm so they can now issue. So that's what I mean by systems issues. So the second big systems issue is the concession falls off when you change, when you move, you know, if you're a tenant. Now, if you're a tenant in Queensland, on average, you move every 13 months. So this is another systems issue that can easily be changed. Queensland government is not talking to the retailers. They're not ensuring that they're doing the proper training on their concessions. And the issue with concessions is each state has different concessions. So the retailer has to know the concessions for each of the states. And that's quite a lot of information to know for every single call center worker and even every worker in the hardship teams. It would make life a lot easier, I guess, if we had national concessions. However, having said that, we need to make sure that they're at the higher end of the concessions, not the lower one. So that's these systems issues. And look, I'm happy. I don't want to talk too long today because I do actually have to go shortly, but I'm happy to talk individually on a lot of other systems issues that I see. The second thing is there's still gatekeeping going on, unfortunately, by some retailers to get onto the hardship program. And again, I think that's all that is a training issue. It's not that, it's just that workers were trained a few years ago and they haven't caught up with the guideline. And again, I think it's incumbent on the AER and on governments to ensure that the retailers are being trained on things like the hardship guideline. One issue that I see a lot of is inefficient appliances. And it's one, like, you know, I have in my own house, I have really efficient appliances because that's a focus I want, 5-star, even 6-star. I think there must be, in addition to energy efficiency, and I guess this is the wider issue around the just transition for you, Andrew, in particular. There is, to me, there seems to be no incentive by manufacturing companies to manufacture appliances that are not only energy efficient, but also affordable. Because the more expensive, you know, your air conditioner, a 5 or 6-star air conditioner is more expensive than obviously a 2-star one. And unfortunately, lower income people or limited income people have inefficient appliances, and they also have second-hand appliances. And I feel it has to be, there's market failure in this area, and it will have to be governments, I guess, that intervene and actually put some incentives in to manufacturers and universities to do research on affordable, energy efficient. We want energy efficient because we want a zero carbon economy, but we want a just one. And I think it's great having cheaper electricity and having renewables, etc. That's fantastic. But the reality is people are using more appliances. And the reality is, regardless of your income, you are applying. Our lifestyle is becoming that we're using air conditioning. And in Queensland, it's a health issue as well. It's a health and safety issue, especially in some remote areas that you have to use air conditioning. Heaters in the winter, again, you know, you pay $35 in Kmart for a 2,000 watt fan heater. And it's going to cost you that. It'll cost you hundreds of dollars for 3 months if you run it for 5 hours. Those heaters shouldn't be for sale. You know, if really, there needs to be something done on the appliance side, on the affordability, as well as energy efficiency. And look, I think that's enough for me for today. But thank you for the opportunity to raise those points.
Thank you, Rose. There have been extremely useful comments, and you've laid down the gauntlet for, you've laid down the challenge. Would anyone like to take up Rose's position comments or add your own? Yes, Michael.
Yes, I always tell my customers that the greenest kilowatt is the one they don't use. And that fits perfectly with what Rose is saying.
Thank you.
I think the issue that Rose is really clearly articulating, though, is that all the really good, efficient stuff is also the really expensive stuff. And it goes even beyond that. I mean, generally speaking, housing stock in Australia barely keeps the wind and the rain out when you compare it to European housing stock or even the Canadian and US housing stock. So we've got a long way to go on efficiency, building efficiency in particular, because we've just got some pretty crappy stuff that's in the system. It's going to take a long time to get it out and a long time to replace it. And Rose, to your point, you know, the cost of doing that, where does that lie? Because you can't expect a pensioner to go out and spend $3,000 on an energy efficient fridge. They're just locked into what they've got. They don't have a choice. So these are some of the really big issues. I agree with Michael that the cheapest kilowatt is the one you don't have to buy. But how do we get there for a lot of people?
Yeah, but I guess you need to have the incentives for, you know, manufacturing. We're fiercely innovative people. Basically, we have been, but there's no incentives there for manufacturers to develop affordable energy efficiency appliances. So that's my point about that there's market failure. The governments may, like, is the government, like, are any of the universities doing any research in this area?
They probably are, but they're probably also scared that China just steals it all because that's where all the manufacturing happens.
I think
Anyway.
there's an opportunity here around the energy efficiency minimum standards and the trajectory. And then Origin, after the 2011 floods, they gave a 4-star fridge to all of their customers in the Lockyer Valley here in Queensland. You know, so that obviously comes at a cost, and that was a pretty exceptional example of retailers stepping up. And you could look at it cynically saying, yeah, they just want to hold on to their customers, and fair enough. But there's an opportunity there that retailers could actually fund some of these upfront costs for people on their hardship programs, for example. And that would be a big ask for the smaller retailers. But there could be something they could do as an industry or a sector as well. So it might just be something worth exploring around what Origin did and how that might look. And then going back to the majority model, you know, best case could be that the retailers or the energy industry advocates for state governments to implement the energy efficiency minimum standards as per the COAG process with a trajectory. You know, and so part of that would be coming up with financing mechanisms and implementation for better quality housing. So even if they do have inefficient devices, it's not just going out through the gaps in the wall. So there's a bunch of broader systemic issues there that could be addressed.
Thanks, Luke. Wendy, did you want to comment on Rose's comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to just bring back into the frame this concept of equity in the transition. And, you know, we have a really pretty strong understanding of the inequities in what has been the traditional, albeit we're already transitioning, energy system. But looking forward, just this potential outlook for just an increasing widening of the gap between people who are the haves and the have-nots in the energy landscape. And we have just this growing divide when you look at the position of someone who is owning rooftop solar, progressively investing in batteries, early movers on electric vehicles. The amount, the access of benefits that they're getting proportionate to the hardships of people who aren't included in the context of the way current system costs are managed as well, in terms of just cost allocation across different customer groups. We really have to tackle these issues. So I really, yeah, I just would 100% get behind this idea of transition being a priority, and also just this consideration of that there is an intersection between some of our hardship, ideally intersection between issues of hardship that we know today and affordability challenges and the transition. How can we solve for some of those issues through the transition? And I just think that urgently requires greater levels of collaboration and discussion across the industry, and figuring out what is the industry's role and responsibility beyond progressing into new technological space. What's their role and responsibility in bringing everyone along, and what are the different parts that other people like government must play in that context as well. And there's urgency around it, which I'm sure we're all well aware of, but it's always really important to remember the urgency is, you know, we need to achieve a lot in a short space of time, which collaboration again lends itself to, so which I again think points to the charter being a great potential vehicle to contribute to some of this. Yeah.
Wendy, if I may, just great to see you. Hi.
Yeah.
And just clarifying, I mean, in this context, I'm here in my individual capacity as an independent panel member, and ACOS will have its voice in this process. So rest assured, the team in ACOS will be bringing through their views on this. I'm very aware, though, that every year that goes by, when the debates continue to happen, the discussions happen, but we actually don't land on who is actually the responsible actor on a specific part of a change. Another year goes by when more and more people are absolutely going to be left behind. You can see it, right? You know, the transition, what's happening generally in terms of access to technologies, so that, you know, the people who are the wealthiest now can actually really make money out of energy use rather than paying exorbitant bills for the, and the appliances is just an example of that. So really, in this particular process with where we were with the recommendations last year about the target audience being the signatories, on this issue of the energy efficiency side and technologies associated with that, do you have a strong view about what the signatories need to do next most urgently to rapidly accelerate access to technologies for people on low incomes? And what part do you clearly see as government policy responsibilities with the signatories calling for government to do things? Because there can be a bit of this. Oh no, that's their job. Oh no, that's job.
Them. That's
Consumers are still waiting for something to happen, and the mandatory standards, Luke, for example, where's the heat on that?
I don't think I have a great answer
That's
to
all right.
that. But I think if we maybe look at things that we've learnt and go back to the COVID piece, I think the way that the industry variously took on saying it needs to do maybe more than it has in the past, or just sort of asking questions around what is its contribution or how does it need to look after people, and it wasn't done perfectly by any means, but something there catalysed, I think, a different type of sense of ownership to some degree over some of these decisions. I think signatories need to come out publicly and start to say what is important in a transition. I don't have a clear answer. I know that it can't be business as usual. And so if I think about things that I would like to see businesses doing, I would like more visibility. So I would like more visible accountability on what they are doing, what outcomes they want to see, what they see their role being.
Yep.
I'd like them to answer those questions perhaps. Right. And then from that position, we could say, that sounds fantastic, or maybe we need to talk about that more.
You may well not have yet had a chance to look at all the disclosures, fair enough.
Absolutely.
The one from the Energy Charter itself does contain a matrix about responsibilities associated with the different parts of the energy system, but it doesn't go beyond that to look at the responsibility of state governments, local government. So just inviting you to have a look at that, because I think plotting this out more will help to sharpen, which bit is for signatories to look at and which bit is for other parts of it. Sorry, Robin, I know you've had your hand up for a while now. Great. So
thanks, Cass.
Thanks.
I'll come to Robin in a minute, but I think that's all very fair comment, and that's what the panel is looking at, that retail or the energy industry absolutely has a role to play, but so does government, but they're not alone in that. And so it's a question of proportionality and relationships and who should be doing what. But the problems that we're talking about are so significant that there's no doubt government has to step up. And I think the panel will be quite happy to call that out as well. So Robin Robinson, over to you, and then Luke, I'll come back to you.
Sorry, I'm not going to just carry on with that train of conversation. So if Luke wanted to make a comment about that to finish off, I'm happy for him to jump in now.
Thanks, Robin. This is just a real quick comment around one of the things I have noticed is some of the good case scenarios were from jurisdictions that had good state government policy around white certificate schemes or programs to support low-income households to access solar or energy-efficient devices or improved housing quality. So, yeah, just to reiterate, it's the underlying government policy makes it easier for the retailers to do a good job. And that just needs to be pointed out.
Yeah, good point, Luke. Thanks. So, Robin, over to you.
Okay, thanks. So just stepping back to
Can you
the
introduce
beginning.
yourself, Robin?
Oh, Robin Robinson, yes. I'm here primarily as a representative of CODA Queensland in this case. So that's Council on the Ageing, I think most people know. So I'm going to start with a small complaint. I'm sorry about that. I, like others, haven't really had a chance to delve into all of the disclosures in detail at this point. I've skimmed through the ones that are, I think, relevant for this conversation, but I haven't got to the level of detail that I would like to and that I would by the end of the month. So that's really only a week we've had to work through this fairly large assembly of material. So the timing has been quite difficult for me, and I'm just tabling that to see if maybe we could reconsider that sort of schedule in future. So sorry to start with a complaint.
Not at all, not at all. And that's taken on board. Thanks, Robin.
Yeah. So I should also disclose that I have had the opportunity to review draft versions of several of these disclosure statements. So I've already had my chance to give some input into what I think is good or bad. Overall, I think we are seeing continuous improvement in the disclosure statements. I think they're becoming more targeted, certainly becoming shorter and more readable and more customer focused. So I think that there's been a good progression year on year in what we're seeing and what we're being asked to review, and that's great. There are some good examples that I could call out, and the ones in Queensland that I'd like to mention are the work that EQ and PowerLink have done in funding training for the financial counsellors in regional Queensland, which I think really is a very targeted and appropriate response to consumer vulnerability. I think also the work that has been through the Energy Charter Group, but I think PowerLink has been quite heavily involved in the land access, guidance on land access has been very valuable and now is sort of spread beyond the Queensland scene into other jurisdictions, which I think is a step forward. And also the work on the board engagement that was led by the chair of PowerLink. I think that was a really good piece of work as well, and just highlights that the benefit of board involvement in the charter process. So big tick for PowerLink from that. One of the concerns, so a few things that I'd like to see improved. One is that when I look at these disclosure statements, what I'm looking for is the business to say, this is what we said that we would do last year. This is what we actually did, and this is what we're going to do next year. And that makes it quite more straightforward for me to have a look and understand the progression, the progress that's being made, if they're meeting the commitments they made last year, and whether their next lot of commitments is actually advancing the discussion. Sometimes that's a little bit hard to draw out of the disclosure statement. So if it's possible, I'd really like to see that, more condensed and clearer way. And some businesses have done it more effectively than others. As part of this process, we have CODA energy advocates across the country, and one of my colleagues has joined us on the call, and now she seems to have disappeared. Sue, I think she may have dropped off. So nationally, our energy advocates have been looking at the disclosure statements in their jurisdictions. And some of the common comments that are coming back from those analyses are that they would like to see more justification of the business's claims for consumer benefit. So there have been a number of statements that said, we undertook this initiative and consumers benefited and they really liked it, without substantiating or giving us any evidence as to how the consumers have benefited and whether they actually did benefit or not. So I think that's a fairly general point across the board, that substantiation of the claims would be helpful. And sometimes that's been achieved through the Customer Council endorsement, sometimes it hasn't. When we're looking at the themes going forward, and I agree that they're the two or three key themes that we're talking about, the affordability is still a significant issue for older consumers. I'm seeing much more awareness of the affordability issue across all the businesses that we're looking at in Queensland. I think there is acknowledgement that each of these businesses can do things to improve the situation with affordability for consumers, and that prices generally have reduced in the last 12 months. However, my big however is we are in the low interest rate environment. There will come a time when the tide will turn, inflation will kick in again, and prices will start to go up, and they may go up quite significantly. And the challenge, I think, for the businesses, it's been relatively straightforward to reduce prices in a low interest rate environment and low inflation environment. When the tide turns, the challenge will be much more difficult to address. And when that tide will turn is a bit unknown, but I think it's maybe going to be sooner rather than later. In terms of the energy transition, for quota constituents, we're really concerned, both from the issues that have been mentioned already, the low income or low and fixed income consumers who can't really lash out and buy a new energy efficient fridge and all this sort of thing, and their digital exclusion in general. And when you combine those things together, there's a high potential that they are going to be likely to miss out on the benefits of this energy transition. And at this point in time, the disclosure statements that I've looked at, certainly under the sustainability heading, talk a lot about the technology. But so far, they're not talking about consumers and the transition process and how everybody can be brought along in that process. So I think that's another challenge for the next round of disclosures or the next round of Better Together initiatives. With Wendy's talked about it already and others. It's the task for the next year. It's urgent. It's something that's upon us now. How are we going to address this challenge so that nobody gets left behind? I might stop there. Thank you. Let somebody else have a turn.
No, that was really helpful. Thank you. Would anyone like to comment on anything that Robin has raised?
Robin, can I just get your views, if you wouldn't mind? Thank you. That's all really, really, important observation, both about the presentation of disclosures and what's actually happened, and where you see things are at. In this process of the transition, to what extent do you think, COTA is a great example of obviously a very key community sector organisation representing a very important part of the community. Do you feel that COTA has access to the right parts of the discussion about making sure that that voice is participating in the decisions, or are you worried about the process is just not being designed to allow you to get stuck into the heart of who's making the decisions as they play out? You're on mute there, Robin. Thanks.
Robin, take yourself. Okay.
Thank you.
the difficulty, I think, is that there is not just one process.
No.
There are multiple processes happening everywhere about this subject. And yes, we try to inject our voice in as many of them as we possibly can, but there's no way we can be in all of those conversations or be well enough across the issues to have a meaningful presence in all of those conversations, have the skills and the resourcing to participate adequately in all of those conversations. So that's a concern. And the other part of the concern is that a lot of the conversations are purely technical. So consumers aren't part of the discussion at all. You know, there's technical standards groups and technical design groups and everything that's happening really based on the engineering and the science, which is good, but I can't see that being brought together very clearly with the consumer perspectives. So I guess it's a national problem,
Yes.
but I can't see that somebody or some group has developed the way forward collaboratively at this point.
Yeah. And it's I think it's a very astute observation that it's like you know, the afterthought that there'll be the sort of the compensation bit at the end.
Yeah. The safety net. Yeah.
Rather than in the heart of the design and the power. You know, we're building new infrastructure for very, you know, that will. So that's a really useful observation. Thank you.
Okay. Any?
It's Luke again. I'm wondering if therefore there's an opportunity, you know, around, we just had mention of the transmission and infrastructure, around the co-benefits in the RES process. So I didn't have the capacity to contribute, but we just had a review of the Queensland RESs, and the opportunity is around funding, say, ACCC's recommendation 38 around energy literacy programs, but that could be extended to some of the issues we're talking now around access to technologies, you know, 4 to 6-star appliances, etc. So yeah, I haven't looked into all of the disclosure statements to see if any of the retailers or any of the transmission companies had mentioned co-benefits, but maybe that would be something to bring up in the final report.
It's almost like the you know, the notion of technology led. You go, yes, but where's the people?
Yeah.
To actually lead the technology and who's got control of it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of that also, like I mentioned, around getting off gas. So, you know, an example could be having, you know, heat pumps and induction stoves for low-income households and rental properties. You know, and that's a big ask, but we should not be installing gas, hot water or gas stoves from now on. But renters don't have the opportunity to you know, make that decision. So are there programs of that distribution companies could fund when they're doing the transmission, or generators could fund when they're doing the generation as part of the RESs?
That's great. Thanks, Lou.
Thanks, Luke. And Whitehouse.
Thank you, Claire. This is not on transition, so a bit of a move off, but I really wanted to let the group know about a couple of initiatives that we've been working on. I've been working with Sabine at the Energy Charter on a couple of Better Together initiatives that you may or may not have heard of. The first one is
and could you introduce your...
I'm sorry, Anne Whitehouse from Sales Assured, and I've been working with the Energy Charter, as I mentioned, on a couple of initiatives. One is a broker code that we launched earlier this year, and it is working with energy retailers, brokers and consultants to lift the standards of behaviour in an area which has been not heavily regulated in the past for those large business customers and some of the multi-site customers. And we aim to deliver on some high-level principles around customer centricity, transparency, making sure that offers are fit for purpose, and accountability. And we put the code together back in 2020, and we had some good engagement with that, including from the EUAA and other industry consultation. We've got 42 signatories, which I think is amazing, and Lolita Rainsbury, I see, is on the call today from Edge 2020, who's one of our signatories. So the aim of that, as I say, was really to get people to step up. And with 42 signatories to date, that has been a really well subscribed code. And I really encourage any other retailers who've got energy brokers and consultants that they're working with to ensure that they do take part in this code. The other one that I'm really excited about is an initiative that Sabine and I are currently working on, which is a new code of conduct for comparators and switching services. Some years ago, there was a code that was initially drafted for energy comparators, but unfortunately, we didn't have the wherewithal to really launch that and make it effective. Now is a Better Together initiative. We've got the right kind of framework to get that going. So I'm currently, working with a group of people to design that code. We had an initial consultation about 2 months ago. We had about 40 people from different organisations participated. We've now got that code in development, and we've got many of the big people in the comparator space and the switching service space involved in that, as well as 2 consumer group people who are helping us along. We aim to have that drafted by November and then to send that for wider circulation. So I hope many of you on this call will be able to give us your feedback on that, because the comparative space is an area that truly needs, I think, a bit of coordination to make sure that we're really delivering on customer outcomes there. Sabine and I have had some discussions with the AEMC and the ACCC around what we're doing and what we've got planned, and we will of course keep them abreast. But the next phase for us is getting this code bedded down. And as I say, it'd be really great to get some feedback from some of the people who are on this call here today to make sure we're really putting the consumer at the centre of what we're doing there. That's it for me.
Thank you. There are some requests through the chat room for a link for the broker code particularly. Could you type that in, or
yes, we'll do.
And let people know so that they can follow up on that information. So thank you. Yes, Michael.
And just on those comparators, what I do with my purchases is I split them into the retail component and the network component. And that way I can keep everyone honest and get the lowest possible prices, so that there is no hiding when if a network price drops, then under the systems I've got, the whole price drops. It's not optional for the retailer to do that, because the network prices are passed through on under my systems. So.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Very good for us.
Sorry, Anne, you've got.
I just on that, I apply that to both the small NMIs and also the large NMIs and the very large NMIs. So.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you, Anne. Other comments? Anything that people want to make? Yes, Michael, go.
Yeah, I'd like to see the distribution companies put in these responses where they're actually learning from some of their past mistakes. I'll give you an example. Last year, Energy Queensland pointed out, and I pointed out to them so they could put it in their disclosure, that a site in Western Queensland, it was out near Charleville, was changed tariff, and they had omitted to change the tariff from a quarterly reading to a monthly reading. Yes, they had made the changes at that site. As we speak today, I've still got a site west of Charleville whose tariff has changed from being a small quarterly read NMI to a large monthly read NMI, but the site is still being read quarterly, and therefore the billing for the demand component is the highest demand recorded over 3 months rather than the highest demand recorded over 1 month. So in my opinion, this means that they're not complying completely with the intent of the legislation in Queensland, particularly the information that the Queensland Competition Authority puts out on their notified prices.
Thanks, Michael. Anyone else want to make a comment?
I've got another comment if no one else steps in.
Yes, that's fine.
A bit.
Yep, no, that's all right.
Just Michael just remind me, I've got a second position and I do energy literacy workshops for low-income households, and we're still seeing a lot of customers getting estimated readings. And we recently heard about an Indigenous community where the retailer hasn't been to visit them or spoken to them for quite some time. So they're getting surprised, getting bill shock when it catches up with the actual reading. So yeah, just sort of wondering, I understand that retailers are meant to do an actual reading once per 12 months. And why isn't that happening? And what's the impact on consumers? So if they do get a bill shock, what's the action of the retailers?
Michael?
Luke, it's the retailers actually don't do the readings. It's the distribution companies that do the readings.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so take it up with the respective distribution entity for the area, I'd say.
Cool. Have a choice of two then.
Yeah. Yes. I personally see lots of estimated readings in lots of accounts. My advice to my customers is always to make sure that the meter readers can actually get in there to read that meter. So yes, in some cases I've had errors on the meter reader's part, but in other cases it is purely that the meter reader cannot get access to the meter to read it. So there's fault on both sides there.
Robin Robinson, is that an issue for CODA members?
It's not something that we hear a lot about. I think access is usually the difficulty, and particularly for, I think it's mostly Ergon, when they introduce the code of practice around entry to premises if there are dogs on the premise, and they won't allow the meter readers to enter the premise if there's loose dogs. And so there's an obligation on the resident to make sure their dogs are locked up when the meter readers are coming. So for older people, that's not typically a major issue because they're more likely to be at home and be able to cope with that circumstance. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, there are a number of people saying that they have to go, so we won't continue this if everyone has had their say. But Andrew or Cass, was there anything that you wanted to add before we finish up, or anyone else who wants to make a comment?
Look, just picking up on, I think it was a process observation from you, if you're still with us, about the participation of consumers in the CEO Council meeting. Could I just ask you to expand on what you were proposing there?
Sure. In the main document, there was mention about, I think it was in the main document, but there was mention about the CEOs meeting regularly. And I didn't see in the bit I read that there's any mention of those CEOs being outside of the utilities themselves and the signatories. But it'd obviously be good to see, say, that the COSs and the PACs of the world included in those.
Thanks, Luke.
Andrew, did you have any other questions or comments?
No other questions, Claire. I mean, the only comment would be that Queensland is exactly, well, almost exactly the same as New South Wales, which is almost exactly the same as Victoria and Tasmania with the issues. It's there's a level of consistency there. I really like quote from, or statement from Wendy there, but collaboration on COVID should continue with collaboration on transition to net zero. Of all the bad things that have happened around COVID, perhaps some of the collaboration that we've seen and some of the innovation we've seen, and this is one of our other themes, it seems, should carry on. You know, COVID's that's not for Christmas, it's forever. Let's make sure we get the industry to keep doing the right thing beyond the COVID pandemic ending, and try and make some of it stick, as Cass said before. So
Thank you. Anne Whitehouse, you've still got your hand up. Did you want to say anything, or was that from before?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Well, look, I will call that to a close, but to reinforce those messages that these forums are really valuable because you are at the front line, and your feedback is really important to get a reality check on what the companies are saying. We take on board all your comments. Your comment, Robin, about the process. It's always a very tight timeline for us, and this year was different because, as I said, the CEOs asked if these forums could be first, not second. So that put a bit of pressure on time, but we will look at all these sorts of things for the future. So thank you for those comments, and thank you for all your time. We know how busy everyone is and how pressured everyone is. So thank you very much. And our report will be published in December. And I think because you're on our list, you'll receive a notification about that. If you would like to make a submission to us, it doesn't have to be anything, it doesn't have, we're obviously not looking for war and peace, and it doesn't have to be incredibly formal, dot points or anything, key issues that you would like to draw to our attention. We'd very much welcome that as well through the IAP website. So thanks everyone for your time. Thank you for joining us today, and stay safe, everyone. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.